There is one thing in common between many of the greatest casting champions and fly casting innovations in U.S. history. It's tied to a 15-year-old orphan who lived to fight in World War II and return to revolutionize fly rod and fly line design, all with absolute zero education. It's also tied to the Apple iPhone that you're using right now to listen to this podcast. And today we're going to highlight for you what makes the Golden Gate Casting Club so successful and what you can do to improve your fly casting through the inspiration we're going to dig in today. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species you love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up in a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone in the world. Jim Dawson, who is the resident historian at the Golden Gate Casting Club, is going to take us on a journey back in time of how the casting club became what it is. And he's also going to tell us where fly casting comps and clubs started in the U.S. This goes back into the 1800s. You will hear about the fly casting champion, who is the only fly caster who's made the cover of Sports Illustrated. You'll find out how Jimmy Green created all this innovation, a lot of it, and how he also got into spay casting late in life and created this device which gave him a wedgie every time he tried to use too much top hand on his spay rod. We get some Jimmy Green stories, and we also find out how the hollow rod tube concept started right here at the Golden Gate Casting Club. So much today. I just want to dig into it. We're also going to hear about mono shooting lines, mono running lines, and how this all came to be, the technology here. Plus, you're going to find out the story of how Jim became good friends with Steve Wozniak, Apple co-founder, and a funny story about Steve Jobs. We even get a Steve Jobs story in here about why you want to avoid Steve on the elevator. So we're going to be jumping around, having a good time here today, and we're going to take it back in history, and we're going to take it back to the reason why you will know why all the technology you appreciate so much right now. We're going to talk about where that all came from. Here we go. Jim Dawson from ggacc.org. How's it going, Jim?
Going good.
Good. This is a long time coming again, like some of these we do. We've heard a lot about the Golden Gate Casting Club from whether it's Tim Rajeff, Maxine McCormick, lots of it. It's just the name that's out there. And I know it's one of these places that's kind of top of the world. Like this is where everybody goes for the Spay-orama. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to go deep on the Golden Gate Casting Club. But before we get there, let's jump into your background in fishing and fly fishing. What's your first memory? How'd you get into it?
Well, before that, can I just say thanks? This is like the first podcast I've ever done.
Nice.
And, I'm a retired tech guy. I did 7 startups in a little stretch in venture. And I come to understand how hard it is to build anything in tech that lasts.
Right.
It's super hard. And you've built a podcast how many episodes are you up to now?
Well, we're officially above 600, but we've got more because we got bonus. Yeah. So somewhere above 600.
600 episodes. Wow. That's awesome, especially in tech. And, to think it could all end today with that one bummer show on history. I'm kidding, but hey, we're going to talk about Industrial Fishing Club in San Francisco, but thank you. I'm honored really to join the guests that you've had before on this show. I'm really rather honored.
No, definitely. No. I just hearing the history. I love the history of fly fishing. I mean, I've always focused this podcast on, even the name, right? Wet Fly Swing. It's so basic, but it's kind of a throwback to the history. I think that I love hearing about it. So today we're going to talk history, right? We're going to hear about this Golden Gate Casting Club, why it's the one place. But have you been on the fishing? Have you been fishing for your whole life? Or are you more of a newer to fly fishing?
No. I've been fishing on the Madison. I was 10 when I caught my first fish on a fly that I had tied. It was a renegade.
Oh, nice.
And a long circle. But today, when I'm on the deck having coffee in the morning, I can look down and see that very spot on the river where, 50 years ago, caught that first fish. So I'm very lucky.
Wow, that's right. Because you split your time, right? You split your time between kind of the modest Montana and in San Francisco. Is that right?
Yes. We're in the heart of the city in San Francisco from about, I don't know, November till after the spay ends, and then I make a northern migration, and I'm based in Montana from then until basically the end of hunting season. So
and hunting, and so and talk about the spay because that is one big event that. I mean, the best in the world go to the spay. I've talked to many people that have been there, from, Mia talked, I know a long time ago about her, her journey. But yeah, so when is the spay?
So it's usually that third week in April, right? And, we got through a couple of lean years with COVID, but the competitions continued. And we're really looking forward to this year because we're going to have a full roster, and it's just a super fun time. It's springtime in the city. It's gorgeous. Golden Gate Park just erupts with, these beautiful flowering trees and bushes. And then, the casting ponds themselves are really spiffied up, and, flags from everywhere. The competitors come in, and it's just a really fun time. And then you get to watch guys like Travis Johnson throw these 200-foot bombs that just defy gravity. I mean, you watch how the really good spay casters cast, and you just look at it and you go, that's impossible, but they do it. So it's a really fun time. If anyone's in town, it doesn't cost anything. You should come to the park. It's really a fun time to be here.
Nice. So that's third week. So we're looking, I guess we might, because we're doing this episode before, but it might air after. But yeah, roughly it's always about the third week in April.
Great. Yeah, that's when it is.
Okay. So let's just jump right back into, and we're going to jump around a little bit, but let's go right back to the history. Let's take this back to why a casting club, because the Golden Gate Casting Club isn't in every town, but why here? And maybe tell us about the history of why these things popped up and why they aren't, maybe why we don't see more of them around.
Oh, sure. So the history kind of goes back to the 60s, and I'm talking about the 1860s.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's when the very first sort of casting competitions started happening in the U.S. And it kind of started with informal contests that caught on, and it led to clubs that were formed that would then compete with other clubs. And there were even casting competitions held during the Civil War. In fact, I just read about a fly casting contest in Central Park, New York in the 1880s. But the first national competition took place in Chicago at the World's Fair in 1893. And it kind of became a legitimate sport, one that was covered in newspapers. And, I've even heard of reports of it being covered on the radio, although I can't imagine anything more exciting than this is a radio broadcast of
right.
a casting competition. But it kind of became a sport. And competitive casting in San Francisco started the following year. So that's 1894 at the World's Fair that was held in Golden Gate Park.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So we're going way back in. So what was that? Because now we do have obviously spay-a-rama, but are there other casting competitions around the country that are out there?
No, there totally are. In fact, the club hosted the U.S. Open, the first ever U.S. Open casting competition last summer. And it's still a sport. They travel back and forth, to Europe and the U.S. And, the Nordics particularly have some really, strong casters. And, they consist of a number of these games, they call them, right? There's a trout game, there's a dry fly game, then there's the distance game, and they do spay casting, and they do, all sorts of casting, fly casting, as well as sort of plug casting. Right, with spinning reels, put your thumb on top. I can't do those.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this isn't just fly fishing. This is everything.
This is all casting. Yeah. And, the club still remains a fixture in those global casting competitions. Something a lot of people don't expect, right? But it totally happens and is a big part of our culture to this day at the GGACC.
Yeah. Okay. Because we've been hearing a lot about, say, like Team USA, the fly fishing team USA, where they're, you hear about Euro nymphing and they're traveling the world competing. But this is really totally different, right? This is not connected to that at all. This is a separate thing.
Yeah, this is not a fishing competition. This is sort of the precursor to that. And that is, how do you deliver that fly? And it's all about the casting.
Okay. And where could somebody go? Do you know where we could go to find out more about, to track where these events are around the country? Is there I know you have your website. We've mentioned the ggacc.org, but is there a national website?
There is. It's the American Casting Association, the ACA, and that's who the governing body of the sport in the U.S. is today. One of our club members, Chris Korich, is and has had a significant role within the ACA for numbers of years, and it's a happening thing.
That's awesome. No, I'm glad you brought up Chris's name. He reached out to me. I can't remember how, but after I think maybe listening to that Tim Rajeff episode, because obviously the whole story there, and we'll talk about Tim a little bit as well. But it was really interesting. We just chatted on the phone. We're going to bring him on the podcast soon, but he's a coach, right? And one of his stars, I think Maxine McCormick.
Oh yeah,
is probably So talk about, maybe let's go to Maxine real quick. I hope to get her on as well to hear this. But how does a 13-year-old girl win a championship, and not just win it as a girl or a woman or a 13-year-old, but as the best in the world? How does that happen?
Well, it's interesting. There is absolutely an element of, I don't know, skill and just natural born to itiveness, right? Prodigy, if you will. And
like the Tiger, I always go back to the Tiger Woods thing, because Tiger Woods, we know we all have issues, right? Tiger's had some issues, but I remember following the story, and I mean, the kid was right in his barely could walk and was golfing, and he also had natural ability, and he had that dad that was there that was so all that came together to be the greatest in the world. Is that kind of the same thing with Maxine?
I think it is. Her dad was a competitive caster in San Francisco with the Golden Gate Club, and he really taught her. But Chris Korich, as we talked about, he's probably maybe the world's most successful casting coach, but he was the one that helped get her to that first world championship when she was 12 years old. Right. And Chris, you'll have a fun time with him. He is an encyclopedia of interesting facts about this sport, both as a champion caster himself and as a coach. But Maxine is just one in a long series of champions that have come from the Golden Gate Club, right? Everybody knows the GOAT, right? The greatest of all time, as we like to call him, the Joe Montana of casting, Steve Rajeff.
Yeah, Steve Rajeff.
And, Steve has 57 championships and 14 world titles, and he grew up just a short bike ride from the pond, both he and his little brother, right? And so he grew up, and Steve won his first title at age 15. But there's so many interesting stories. Do you know anything about Jimmy Green?
Yeah, I mean, his name's come up a lot, and he's come up with multiple people who have talked about his influence. But give us a little Jimmy Green story, because I want to talk about some of the famous people that have been through there, and you've mentioned a couple: Steve Rajeff, Tim Rajeff, and Jim Green maybe is one of the most famous, right? Or he had a lot of influence.
I think so. Has a much larger influence on the modern day sport than I think most people could guess, right? And if anybody knows him, they usually know him as the as the Fenwick guy, right? But Jimmy Green, I was doing some research on this, and I got all this stuff out of old newspapers. He was in 1936 a 15-year-old orphan living in downtown Oakland, right? And he played high school football for Oakland High, and he got hurt. He suffered an injury that was, I guess, bad enough the doctors told him no more strenuous sports for you.
Wow.
Right. Which I think sounded like was a rather devastating thing to this young man, right? Who I'm sure was very athletic. And all of a sudden he's being told he can't play football anymore. Well, on a walk through Golden Gate Park, he happened upon the club, and he saw these gentlemen waving these bamboo wands and these rods throwing fly lines. And he was kind of mesmerized. And like always happens around clubs like that, you show up and you have a question on your face, you get your arms thrown around, and all of a sudden, people will take you in and teach you how to cast. So here's the interesting thing. Not 18 months from first picking up a fly rod, Jimmy Green is on his way to France to compete in a world championship.
Wow.
So he had to take a train, he had to take a boat.
Jeez.
You can't make stuff up like this. So there was then the stakes were high, right? There was a cup that had been pledged by this French heiress. Her name was Lady Violet Burr, and it was a gold cup worth then $5,000, which today is, I don't know, worth like 120,000. So
oh, wow.
And it was to be awarded to whoever would win the championship, so long as, number one, they were an amateur, right? And that was very, very important. And number two, that they had never won before. So here rolls up young, I guess he's 16 and a half, right? Jimmy Green, and he wins every single event that he enters.
No way.
He sweeps it. And, you talk about a prodigy, right? So that is a prodigy. So what's the first thing you do, right? You ask, well, where's my cup?
Yeah.
And I think he learned a really important life lesson. He said, monsieur, not to denigrate my French accent, but
right.
he was told then that because of the laws around gold, right? This was pre-World War II, rather, that you couldn't export gold. So they told him, well, it will be impossible.
Really?
You can't have the prize. Yes, he got stiff.
Oh my gosh.
So then he asked, can I get a photo? And they even said no. Jimmy Green had to get the ambassador of the United States involved, and then they finally let him take a picture of it. And later in life, he recounted, he goes, it wasn't even a very good picture.
No way.
Anyway.
Wow. So Jim Green basically does everything right. He's the greatest out there. And he gets stiffed by France. Again, back to France. This is a classic. We love all the countries, but France sometimes gets some jokes out there, right?
Yeah. And by the way, that was just the start, right? So Jimmy Green went on. He had two more competitions. He competed in Belgium and he competed in the UK, and he won both of those. He returns to the US, and he now is a competitive caster, and you go do all the tournaments and all. World War II happened, and he gets drafted. And he goes D-Day, goes into Normandy, and returns, fortunately, a couple of years later. And he ends up going to work at the Winston Rod Company, which is on 3rd Street in San Francisco.
Oh, right.
And that's where he learns how you take bamboo and you turn it into a hollow tube to throw a fly line, right? That's really where he understands how you form actions of fly rods. Now, it's an interesting story from there. He starts his own rod company. He is joins a company that gets acquired and merged, and he ends up at Fenwick. Now, this is post-World War II when these composites are just starting to come out. And Jimmy Green was the head rod designer at Fenwick for 25 years. And he probably designed every brown fly rod you have in your closet, right? I mean, all of those years, he became an absolute engineering genius without the benefit of any of those degrees, right, that you need from school. And he just was this incredible physical talent, right? Just a competitor. He competed for many, many years. He was also this engineering genius that invented or built the world's first graphite fly rod. Jimmy Green built the world's first boron fly rod. He did a lot of stuff. He invented the shooting head with monofilament running line that you use every time you go chasing steelhead.
And this is with no education in engineering at all.
Exactly. He was a genius.
Stonefly nets, nestled in the heart of the Ozarks, Ethan, a master craftsman, dedicates his skill to creating the finest wood landing nets. Stonefly nets are more than just nets. They are part of our story, each cast and every cast. Ready to make your fly fishing trips unforgettable? Visit stoneflynets.com and discover the difference of a handcrafted wood landing net. Every adventure on the water starts with a single cast. At Jackson Hole Fly Company, that first cast begins with us. From their thoughtfully designed rods and reels to intricate detail of over 1,000 meticulously hand-tied fly patterns, they embed their story of dedication and their commitment to quality in every product they carry. Shop for fly fishing gear where quality meets affordability and exceptional craftsmanship doesn't come with a hefty price tag. Arm yourself with gear that doesn't support your passion but amplifies it. Fly fishing begins here. Shop now at jacksonholeflycompany.com. So Fenwick, that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously Fenwick back in the 70s, 80s, whatever, was the best of the best. And then eventually what did he go into? Did he have, what was his last thing he did? Or I can't remember.
So he retired from Fenwick. And I read an account one day that Tom Morgan had gone to visit Jimmy Green at the Fenwick factory, right? And everybody knows Tom Morgan, right? Tom, the Winston Company, moved it to Twin Bridges, was the Winston guy for years.
Yeah.
But Tom commented, having visited Jimmy Green at Fenwick's headquarters, he goes, everyone in that place loves Jimmy Green, from the people on the loading dock to the operators on the telephone. He was just a widely loved person. Anyway, he retired and he moved to the Pacific Northwest, and he consulted with Sage.
Yeah, that's right.
For a while, right? Yeah. But, there's a funny Jimmy Green story that I do the talk at the Spay-orama sometimes, the history talk, and people are like, oh, Jimmy Green, right? And so one of the interesting Jimmy Green stories I got was from one of our longtime members at the GGACC, Nelson Ishiyama. And he said that, he was a friend of Jimmy's and would visit him. And he said I think he was in his 80s, Jimmy Green was in his 80s, and this whole spay thing happened.
Oh, right.
And he wanted to learn how to spay cast, right? Now, you and I both know how hard that is.
Yeah.
And he couldn't master it. I guess 80 years of muscle memory of using his right hand.
Yeah.
He just couldn't break that bad habit, right? A pull, not a push. So anyway, Nelson said Jimmy Green, in true Jimmy Green fashion, figured out this little appliance. He said it attached around his wrist and it ran through a D-ring in the back of his vest. And then the terminal end was an alligator clip that he would attach to the top of his jockey shorts, so that every time he pushed that top hand, it gave him a wedgie.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Are you serious? Is that a true story? That's a true story?
That is a true story. And that's how Jimmy Green learned to master a spay cast. Oh, and by the way, he totally was a spay caster by the time he passed away.
Oh, he was.
He had mastered that. Yeah, it's like every other thing. He always had a home with a pond that had fish, right? And that's where he practiced. So that's
wow.
That's it on the Jimmy Green genius, right?
That is an awesome story. The wedgie with the alligator clip, and that's so funny because it was just April Fools recently, and I saw a lot of the clips from people out there doing April Fools online, and it was a lot of that stuff. And literally, Jimmy Green did do that, and so this is cool. So I'm glad Jim, you went down that track with Jimmy. But so let's get back into. Let's just talk more. We were talking about Chris. So Maxine, Steve Ray, Jeff, all these people, basically, because they have this casting club there, that is the reason. Obviously, these people had a physical ability and things, but is that mainly because there's other casting clubs around the country, right? But you're not seeing world champions coming out of those as often. Is that correct?
Well, it's the history of the GGACC that once you become established, you kind of nurture the next generation. And it goes all the way back to E.C. Powell of Powell Rod fame, right? Who was a member of the first club championship that the GGACC ever won. And that was like back in the late 30s. And then, those old guys brought along the next generation, Jimmy Green, John Tarantino. John Tarantino, I think we had talked about when you visited the club. John was the only casting champion ever featured as the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine.
Oh, wow.
And, John won 12 straight world casting titles, and then he retired and he became a designer. He designed the first non-bamboo rods that Hardy ever produced. He was an advisor to Fisher and to Scientific English, worked on rod tapers there. Really tragic story about John. He was killed at age 36.
Jeez.
By a random burglar. He was working at his family's market. They sold like poultry and fish, and he came back after a cup of coffee one morning, and a guy had snuck in and was waiting for him to come and open the safe, and they found him the next day with a bullet in his head. Dang. And it's just a terrible tragedy to think that this incredible talent, right, got snuffed out so young in his life. But yeah, so that John Tarantino, and then the next generation, Steve came along, and Maxine McCormick. There's a lot of other champions that were GGACC champions that you probably never heard of. Some of them you may have through their works, if not by name. But there's a guy named Myron Gregory, who, okay, that's a footnote in history. Myron invented or orchestrated the standardization of line weights used to be about a fly rod, and then you had to guess, right, to find something that would load it and cast it well. And so it was really we worked with all the manufacturers to come up with the definition. What's a 4-weight, a 5-weight, a 6-weight, a 7-weight, and right. So there's lots of things like that in the history of the club that I think kind of been lost on a lot of folks. That, I call it take a step back, right? So San Francisco in the Bay Area is known as kind of a center of innovation, right?
Of tech. Yeah. It's your Silicon Valley, right? I mean, it's San Francisco. It's all there. Like the Silicon Valley, maybe that's what you were involved in, right? For your life.
Yeah, no, I did 7 startups, and so I got to see that innovation from the inside. And, it's interesting. Everybody knows about silicon chips and iPhones and the internet and AI and all that stuff, right? And then the companies, of course, everybody knows Apple, everybody knows Google, everybody knows Facebook, everybody knows that electric, rocket car battery messaging company, right? So those were all waves of technology disruption, right? But they weren't the first ones, right? They just followed other waves of technical innovation, even more important to fishermen, right? I call it the angling technology innovation wave, right? And all of that technology, that wave of fish tech, originated and was centered at the casting ponds of the Golden Gate Club. The double hull, the drag system on your first fly reel, shooting heads, first rods, the world's greatest whip finisher, right? That all comes from GGACC or GGACC members. There's probably 11 rod companies, along with more world championship casters and more world records and, the youngest champions, all right from the middle of Golden Gate Park, right across from the buffalo paddock. So, it really has had this outsized influence. But, to figure out where that kind of comes from, should I jump back into the history for just a second?
Yeah, well, let's highlight that again. So basically, Silicon Valley, right? This is San Francisco. San Francisco is obviously a big city, the Bay Area, this whole thing. California, where it's at, but there's other meccas around the country, New York, other places that are, obviously populated and big. But I think it is that tech. So you're saying maybe the tech, just that whole world of the people that were there, that infused itself into the fly fishing, the Golden Gate Casting Club, and that's how you think partly that, is that what you're saying? There's some cross-pollination there?
Well, it even goes back a little further than that, right? So we were talking about how the whole, competitive casting thing, how it started and all, right? And the Golden Gate Club, actually, that first competition again back in the World's Fair back in the 1890s or whatever. Okay, so in prep for that competition, some of the local casters decided to get together and practice for that event. And that led a couple years later to the forming of what was called the San Francisco Fly Casting Club, and is the second oldest formal fly casting club in the country, right? Number one was Chicago, right? And that was formed in 1891. And then the Golden Gate Club came along in 96. And then the New York Club came in 1916. And then there were tons of these things. There were clubs from Kalamazoo and Racine and Philadelphia and Boston and Akron. They all had casting clubs, and they would all participate in these competitions, right? So we're talking a time in San Francisco that's not even 50 years after the gold rush, and a very distinct high society, the nouveau riche, had emerged, right? And the club that they had formed was distinctly blue-blooded, right? It was entirely made up of wealthy aristocrats. And what that club did was they built 2 facilities. They built a city club in Golden Gate Park on Stowe Lake, and they also bought, 3.5 miles of the Truckee River, and they built a fabulous lodge. Now, this was at a time there were no roads, right? And so the club, the location they selected was because it was close to a train station. And it turned out that a club member then was the president of the Southern Pacific Railway. And so he managed to just have a rail car added so that the members could get to and from this fishing lodge on Stowe Lake. And so that was the San Francisco Casting Club. The other thing they did, and this is really where the club's roots are, is that, and they would compete, and, it was a competitive thing of these aristocrats, but they realized that some of the best practitioners weren't able to be members, right? They weren't rich guys. And so they added a second tier of membership, and they called them associate members. And associate members were invited to join because they could help the club win championships, right? And so it was really an interesting club. It was blue bloods and blue collars. And that club functioned that way for, I don't know, 37 years. And they amassed just a number of championships and records. And they really had some skilled casters. So in 1933, and sorry, I'm jumping back into this history here, but the club amicably split. The blue bloods took their Truckee Fishing Lodge, and the blue collars took the Golden Gate practice facility and formed the GGACC, right? And so all the associate members of the Flycaster Club became the founding members of the Golden Gate Club. And I was just reading some notes from the first board meeting ever held. And they had 30 members, and they were all really skilled casters, right? And they had a bank account of $109, right? In 1933. And of that $109, they pledged, they called it a gift to Park Police Inspector Mahoney. Why do you give a gift to a cop?
Right.
Some things never change, but that's really when the Golden Gate Club was founded, although its roots go all the way back to 1896, right? That's the GJCC. And that facility where you and I met, right, was completed in 1938, which is about 5 years after the club was formed. And we're talking the middle of the Depression. And it was a combination of land that was donated by the park and some money that was available through Roosevelt's WPA, right? So it was Public Works. And they built that facility, which in its day was a revolutionarily modern world casting facility. It's those 3 ponds that you and I saw that are together about the size of a football field, and the lodge. So the lodge where we met is really like our version of what the butler's cabin is at Augusta.
Oh, right. Yeah, definitely.
Ours is 30 years older. You know, it's a historic log building above those ponds. And as you saw, it's stuffed with really cool stuff, right? The last bamboo rod ever built by Doug Merrick, and who bought the Winston Company from Winston, right?
Yeah.
And ran it for all of those years that Winston was sort of a powerhouse of all of these championships. And the largest world record striper caught on a fly by Russ Chatham, the famous artist, right? And you know, and some of our trophies are there, and you got some flies that are on there from, you know, Mattarelli and Jack Horner and Paulie Roseborough, Calbert. All those guys are tires that have roots through the club. And so that's the facility, right? And that's the facility where we still hold the casting tournaments and, you know, the Spay-orama.
Yeah.
But all of this is captured. I don't know if you like to read Tom McGuane.
Oh, yeah.
Greatest Western writer in my book of all time. He wrote it's a short story. He included it last in his kind of anthology. It was the story called Twilight at the Buffalo Paddock. It's The Longest Silence is the book that it's in, but Twilight at the Buffalo Paddock is about a day he spent at the club in 1966. And that's the Summer of Love. And if you want to know what the club is like, you read that story, and it's amazingly the same today.
Oh,
right?
really?
He talks about, I could go to an all-night raver, or I could go to the casting ponds. He said, in the end, I am a fisherman. So he showed up at the club, and then he wrote that story. And it's a wonderful story. In fact, Tom was very generous. He is allowing us to reprint that within our club history.
Oh, cool.
Process of producing, but yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. And Tom, it's the cool thing is we're going to have him hopefully on the podcast soon. It turns out, I think, I talked to somebody who knows him really well, and it sounds like he's listened to the podcast as well. So I'm excited. He's been somebody I've been wanting to get on for a while. So we'll stay tuned for that. And then we'll put get a link to the show notes to that. What was the name of that article again, or the book?
So it's The Longest Silence is the anthology. There's a number of his stories collected, and the story itself is called Twilight at the Buffalo Paddock.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll see if we can track down some of that, put in the show notes. And good. Well, we've gone down a nice track here. I think we're on track with some of the history. And maybe let's so we can read that to find out more about what the area is like. But let's talk about a little more in depth of Spay-orama, because that's coming right around the corner.
Yep.
So people are coming from around the world to this thing. Maybe describe that event a little bit. What are people going to expect? Is this a one-day event, multi-day? How's that look?
It's a multi-day. There's a day of practice. There's a day of qualifications. Then there's the day of the finals, right? And we run a ladies track and a men's track. We have the general field, and we have a seniors field, right? And the seniors field is you got to be 60. And if you have not competed before, you have to go through a qualification process with one of the judges to show that you know which end of the rod to hold on to.
Right.
You have to qualify, right? Is that you have to do 2 casts of, I think it's 120 feet each.
Okay.
Right? Because we don't want people just showing up for the first time.
No.
Right. And so we implemented that recently. And so these people come and you practice and you qualify, and then, the main round comes and they compete. And it's a combination of 4 casts. Right. And it's really interesting. Again, we're going to go back to Jimmy Green. He's the guy that kind of came up with the format. What they wanted to create was a competition that simulated fishing, not just who can bomb the longest. Right. And so every cast implies a 20-degree change of direction.
Oh, wow.
And you have to do 2 casts, 2 on the right, 2 on the left. You do a single spay and you do a snake roll on both sides, right? So your score is a total of the 4 casts. And it's, there are buoys that you have to set your setup casts in that kind of determine where the 20-degree is, and then you throw and down the middle. And it's just, like I was saying earlier, it's just so fun to see really, truly skilled spay casters do what they do. And for such a minimal amount of physical effort, they get such an outsized result on these things that it blows your mind.
Yeah. And what's the record? Is there a world record, or is there a record at this event as far as length?
Yes. Travis Johnson owns it, and I think it's 208 feet. I'm not sure.
208 feet, somewhere in that range. So it's a long. So 200. And you think the normal typical fly line, right? I mean, people are normally casting is probably about 60 feet, 50 feet, somewhere in there, maybe. So we're talking 4 times. And is this with this is with the spay rod. So this is a big. Typically, is this a large? What's the length? Is there any limits on the length of the spay rod?
There are. It can be no more than 15 feet. So it's a 15-foot rod. The heads that they throw are, 65 to 68 feet. Typically, they weigh, they can weigh over 1,000 grains. And they can build these massive, D-loops, which are really pointed at the back end. They say V-loops aren't true. Well, tell me that after you watch these guys cast. And then it just cuts through the air, and it's just really a fun thing to watch.
So that's it. And then everybody can just sit around. You can just hang out and just watch these people cast 200 feet. And then does the winner get a gold trophy? Or what's the...
Winners get reels.
Yeah, they get reels
that are mounted as trophies, right?
Yeah.
Little display thing. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
It's not for the money. It's for the glory, baby.
Skwala Fly Fishing puts as much time, thought, and effort into designing fishing apparel as you put into finding fish. Founded in Bozeman, Montana by a group of fly anglers who wanted better gear, Skwala builds functional, comfortable, and dependable fly fishing apparel. I've been loving the thermal 150 hoodie I've been wearing from Skwala, and to be honest, I haven't been able to take this thing off. It's super soft. It's perfect in the whether you got hot weather, cold days. This thing is an all-around great piece of gear. Combining advanced materials with fishing-focused, purpose-built design, Skwala waders, jackets, shirts, pants, and insulation are made for us. To help Wet Fly Swing listeners, that's you, Skwala is offering a 10% discount on your next order. Just use Wet Fly Swing 10 at checkout right now to get 10% off your next order. That's Skwala, SKWALA. Gear for us, the like-minded few, serious anglers who don't take themselves too seriously. Today's episode is sponsored by Togens Fly Shop. Togens Fly Shop provides superior quality products at a great price. They have also a great YouTube channel that you can check out right now with new fly tying tutorials each week. Togens also has you covered if you're looking for unique in-house products, and they also support many of the great brands out there that you know and trust. It's been fun connecting with Justin and the family over the years now, and it's been really cool. A great local fly shop. Togens is also offering their fly tying box, where they send out materials at a regular cadence where you don't even have to think of it. You just open the mailbox and there's your Togens pack. And I recently made an order through Togens, and the experience is always perfect. They've got you covered if you ever have questions or need any help, whether that's a YouTube tutorial or connecting with them personally. Since 2005, Togens has been over-delivering on customer service, and it's time for you to check out Togens Buzz for yourself. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/Togens right now to check out their diverse selection of products today. You support this podcast by clicking through that link to Togens online. That's Togens, Togens. Okay, back to the show. And then what about single casting, single hand? Is there a similar event as Spay-O-Rama? Like, is that held there or other places?
Not in Spay-O-Rama, right? But yes, in terms of competitive casting. I mean, we have a tournament every month in the Bay Area, right? And then they have these other tournaments, like the U.S. Open was last year, and there are, those regular competitions, and that's single hand rods and as well as a spay event, they do a spay casting.
They do.
Of the change of direction, though, it's just bombing it, and then they have all of these different casting games we talked about. Yeah, that's how those go, and they keep score. It's like a formal kind of thing.
Okay, now I'm looking at it. Now I'm on the ACA. Remember, this is the 24 tournament schedules, and it's got Southwest tournament, Long Beach, California, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan, right? Yeah, so there's stuff all around, and these are typically the normal but you see people single hand casting. I mean, what is do you have any idea what's a world record, the single hand cast?
Well, that's a good question. I know that back in the 30s, because we have the rod up on the wall, there was a cast with a bamboo rod. That's called the overhead salmon fly, and that one they would boom. They could boom it upwards of 200 feet way, way, way back then.
Oh, wow.
That's not single hand. That's those really big, stout, you saw them, big poles that I don't know what the current record is for single hand, but I'll tell you this much. I guarantee it's the form of that cast is that Golden Gate style of cast.
Oh, the Golden Gate style. Now, what is that Golden Gate style of cast?
Well, that's kind of, I think, one of the elements of secret sauce. We talked about all these championships and how you learn to cast, and it's a fundamental difference. It's instead of a hand pushing the rod forward, it's more of an up and down motion where, you get that power from driving that elbow down, right? As opposed to pushing your hand forward. And it generates a lot more power because you're using bigger muscles. It implies a very crisp stop, right? And that stop is what energizes that line and that tight loop. But I don't know if you ever read Mel Krieger's book, The Art of Casting.
No.
Probably the most successful casting instruction book. Mel was a competitive caster and was a member of the Golden Gate Club.
Okay.
And he really kind of captures that style. When you talk to Corich, ask him, what's this Golden Gate style? He'll tell you.
Okay.
Chapter and verse on that, man.
So that's the Golden Gate style. So yeah, you guys do have your own unique style of cast. And I'm just looking up here. I think I'm looking at a little article Steve Rajeff's talking on a website here, and I think 238 feet, at least back then. So single, yeah. So you can actually cast. That's interesting because I would have thought that you're casting farther with the spay rod, but you're casting farther with they can cast further with the single hand rod.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if your last name is Rajeff, right?
Yeah. 240 feet is crazy. Okay, so that is awesome. Well, what else are we missing here? I mean, we've touched on a few of the famous people. We've talked about the club itself. Anything else you want to shed light on that we're kind of missing here? We want to make sure to cover before we get out of here.
Well, so one thing that a lot of people miss about the Golden Gate Club, and it's back to this whole wave of angling innovation, right? There are 11 rod companies that can trace their roots through the Golden Gate Club. And we're talking, the first two were obviously Powell and Winston, right? In the bamboo age, but Fenwick and Sage and Hardy and G. Loomis and Howells and Scott and Echo and Larry Kenny rods, they've all had heavily influenced by, the Golden Gate Club. But it all started with, like I said, Powell and Winston. And what those two companies did that was different than from every other rod company in the world is they made hollow tubes to cast these fly lines, right? They would hollow. It was the sculpting process. And through doing, they both got patents back in the 30s, right? But that really enabled the building of a vastly better casting and fishing tool.
Right. And you're talking bamboo. You're talking a bamboo rod.
These were bamboo that they would sculpt the inside of those rods.
So this is different than this is not the split bamboo type stuff.
Well, yes, it's split. every bamboo rod is split, right? But then they would do this added step of hollowing out the inside.
Oh, okay.
So that it wasn't consistent in where you choose to do the hollowing and to what extent really influenced what the overall action of that fly rod was. Well, basically, that's the same principle that then allowed, Fenwick and all of these other companies followed after, because they were just using artificial materials to build these hollow tubes to cast a fly rod. And I think that's why the outsized influence from the club. And so, it's interesting, but I'll just end with one more quick story if you don't mind.
Oh yeah.
This is on the whole development of shooting heads, right? And there was a national competition coming up. And again, we're going to talk about Jimmy Green and another casting champion from the club, Phil Miravalli. And they had come up with, and they'd looked at the rule books, and they'd figured out this way they were just going to crush the distance records in this competition. I think it was in a competition in Cincinnati. I'll tell you, who would know, right? Your guess when you talk to Quaritch. He'll ask. But they had worked on this method of, hey, let's take a heavy section of fly line and let's attach it to a monofilament running line. Right. So they did that, and they kept it hidden in a bag, whatever. And they're casting. When the time to cast came out of this tournament, they pulled this thing out, and both of them crushed world records. And obviously, foul, you can't do that. Well, it was entirely legal, right? It's just that no one had ever thought of it before. And so that, monofilament running line with a shooting head started at the Golden Gate Club, and it led to, weight forward fly lines. Right. And was really quite an innovation. But, there's a million more stories like this, and we could go on all morning. But
yeah, that's it. So, well, and again, the innovation is going back to that. I mean, and the people, and we'll talk to Chris about this. We'll dig in deeper on this. This is what's great, is that he will have more information. We'll keep this conversation going. Well, let's take it out of here with our passport kind of shout out segment. This is our segment where we're talking about travel. We're traveling around the country. Like we said, we were down there, not far, just driving, but we're also doing trips around the country, around the world as we go. For you, I mean, you're in two amazing places. You kind of split your time. Are you also trying to get out? Do you have any trips that you're trying to track around the country, or do you stay in kind of focused on your area where you live?
So it's really hard to want to leave Montana.
I know. You're in the best spot, right?
In August. But now I like to, New Zealand, I was fortunate enough. I took a job that was based in Singapore.
Oh, wow.
And was the trajectory, changed my whole life, right? And I made it for the wrong reason. I finished up a stint in Japan. I was headed back to Boston's work, the company I worked for. And they said, you come back, go to business school, you can work in the company. Or we're coming up with this new product group, which was a data storage thing. And I took that job, not because I believed in the future, but because we had a subsidiary in New Zealand. And I knew that if I took this job, I'd have to review that business every quarter.
Right.
And so I reviewed the out of that for 5 years. Right. It was like a half a day QBR and a 3-day fishing trip. In the winter, I was in the North Island, Taupo, Rivers and Great May Famous. But in the summer, my all-time favorite thing is to chase, hunt brown trout in the South Island. So, been there, done that. I went to Kent. I've done, I've been very fortunate. I'm a lucky blind squirrel. Work was lucky. And now that I retired, I can just figure out cool, exciting, exotic places to chase trout.
That's sweet. Yeah, you got it. You've done it. Well, and this is kind of the kickoff when I kind of do this segments. I kind of take it into our random question segment. And so this is where I kind of ask some questions that maybe aren't focused fully on fly fishing. And we'll keep this conversation going for people that are interested. Like we said, Chris, and I'm sure we'll get Tim Ray and hopefully Steve Ray Jeff. He's a guy that's one guy I don't hear as much about out there. Maybe let's touch on that really quick. Tim, obviously with Echo, he was actually hard to track down for a while, but once I got him, we put together 2 amazing episodes. Is Steve also, is he kind of hard to get a hold of? What's your take on Steve? Because he's in the industry, isn't he still?
I think he's largely retired. He still casts, right? And he lives somewhere near you in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, he does? Okay.
Yep. He's, we don't see him super often anymore, but he still comes by and, he's just a gentleman.
Yeah. Well, I'll track him down. Who would be somebody that's out there that's alive or maybe knows? I mean, we've talked about a lot of big names, Jim Green. Who would be somebody who could tell the Jim Green story, like even in more depth? Is there anybody out there that you know of, or any other people?
Quaritch May, Jim Adams.
Oh, Jim Adams.
Yeah, Jim Adams. We just recognized him as an honored member of the club, which is quite a distinction. He's 94 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I had to schedule him for this event where he actually came to the clubhouse and he spoke. And it was so funny. Couldn't find a window in his schedule because he's so busy. Oh, I'm coming back from New Zealand. I'm fishing. I'm off here.
At 94, he's still going.
Jersey, Joe, and the show in Pleasant and blah, blah. So anyway, we did find a window. We locked it down and he spoke. But, Jim Adams is an absolute living treasure. If you could get him on the podcast, it would.
Yeah, we'll work on that. So that's good. So, well, awesome. So we got a little more work to do here, but a couple of questions I was thinking about. One of them was just on your, background in the startups. Like, that's really interesting. You 7 or 8 startups, whatever that was. What were some of the companies? Can you talk about what you did? What were the startups?
Sure. So in a nutshell, right, I went to work for a computer company. They figured out I could speak Japanese. They sent me on a 2-week business trip to Japan. It ended up being 12 years in 4 different countries. I got to fish in New Zealand and all. And that ended, and we moved to the Bay Area in 2000. And that's really where I started doing startups, right? And they were all B2B infrastructure, business to business, big infrastructure, data storage, databases, those kinds of companies. And so, 3Park was a big one that did an IPO and was eventually acquired by HP.
Oh, okay.
Good thing we're with Dell there. People made some money. Fusion.io was another one of the hot ones. I worked with Steve Wozniak.
Oh, wow.
The Woz.
No kidding. So you work with number 2 in Apple, basically Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. So you knew Steve pretty well?
Oh, we were my office next door. He invited me to join his Segway polo team or to play with him.
Oh, wow. So take us back here. This is pretty cool. So I love the Apple story because you hit it on it a little bit. I mean, literally, this is so, right? You're talking on an Apple iPhone. I've got a MacBook. I mean, Apple, right? Mm-hmm. But the story is they're not the first iPhone, like you said. They weren't they weren't the first phone. They weren't the first cell phone. They were just the ones that came in and made the one that everybody needed.
Yeah.
But I know the story of Apple. It's a really I've read Steve Jobs' book. He was a very, unique guy too, right? Very hard,
for sure.
hard. No, I don't know however you say it, but what was Wozniak? Because he was kind of the brains behind the thing. What was that like knowing him? Like, what did you learn from that guy?
So love the guy. Right. Woz is the most generous, gentle, innocent kind of person that has achieved that degree of success and fame in the world you'd ever meet.
Right.
One time we're headed off to Frankfurt and I'm driving and there had been a closure on the Bay Bridge. And so I'm frazzled and I, make my international flight. I get there and make it by the skin of my teeth. And as soon as the plane takes up, I realize, oh, geez, I left my cell phone in the car.
Oh.
And I'm a sales guy, right? I was always
right.
the CRO or the worldwide sales guy, whatever. And it's like, holy cow, cut my hands off, right? A sales guy without a phone.
Right.
So I get to the hotel, I see Woz and I tell him, oh, geez, I don't have a phone. He goes, here, pick one of mine. I see, what am I? He's got 2 phones.
Really?
Yeah. Back in those days, you could get them in black or white.
Oh, wow.
Right? And he's the ultimate prankster. He'd always tell people, hey, what color's my iPhone? And they'd say black or white. And he'd pick out the wrong one, and then he'd laugh because no one could get it right. But,
right.
It was interesting. He's just a great guy. No interest in fishing, however. I wanted him to come to the ranch in Montana. I wanted him to, no interest in that. But he always bought the newest Prius.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, and in that Prius, he would have like 6 different GPSs. And we'd go on a sales call and go, Woz, why do you have so many GPSs? No, I like to compare them. So
right. Gosh, that's so cool. Yeah. So Wozniak, the Woz, he was the man. And eventually he, what happened there? Apple, I mean, he kind of sold, wasn't there obviously, I'm sure he made billions, right? He was the Apple founder, but he kind of got out of it.
Well, so he left the company. He's growing up. He said he had 2 careers that were above all other careers, right? One was to be an elementary school teacher, and this is how he was programmed at home, right? And the other one was to be an engineer at Hewlett Packard.
Wow.
Right. And he did both, right? So his first job was at HP, and he was an engineer. And this is before, Steve talked him into starting Apple and all. But after he quit Apple, he went back and he taught 5th grade in Moscato's public school for, I don't know, 10 years, something like that.
No kidding. So after he made tons of money, unlimited, right? He goes back and he teaches.
He taught elementary school.
God, that's so cool.
And then he also founded the Shoreline Amphitheater, which, is an outside venue where lots of famous rock and roll acts come. He did the festival, right? So he had a couple of global rock and roll festivals. By the way, he's got a Rolodex, I'm sure, unlike anyone else's.
Yeah.
But he still has his boxer he did a few years ago.
Is he still alive?
Oh, yeah.
He's still alive, right? Because Steve Jobs died early because of, I don't know, he didn't take care of himself, right? Or no, it wasn't.
He had liver cancer.
Yeah, liver cancer. And he actually could have, because he was such a natural, he didn't do the treatment because he wanted to cure it with his natural stuff he did, right?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how much, because he wasn't an idiot by any means, right? If there was a way that modern science could have saved him, he would have done it.
He would have done it. Did you know, did you ever meet Steve Jobs?
It was funny. We were selling to Apple. And by the way, Woz wanted nothing to do with selling to Apple when I was at Fusion.io, right? Because he didn't want to unfairly influence things. So he kept that one at arm's length. But the building where Jobs' office had an elevator, and you'd hear the stories of people that would walk a quarter mile out of the way not to be on that elevator.
Oh, really? You mean they didn't want to be on the elevator with Jobs?
Because he would ask you, who are you and what do you do? And if it wasn't a good answer, you were basically done. People kind of described him as the sun. You couldn't get too close. You'd get burned up, or if you're too far away, you'd freeze out. So it was all in finding
So this is not the greatest boss, although he was the guy that created one of the largest companies in the world, right? But he was kind of a hard guy to be around.
He was an absolute genius in figuring out and seeing over the curvature of the earth.
Yeah,
right. He had a vision that he could then just execute, and it was
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
This is cool. Well, I love we went down that track. A couple more here for you, Jim, then I'll let you get out of here. So I've been loving the vices question. I've been hearing from a lot of guests that have loved that question. We've brought it back from the archives, but I'm not sure. Do you tie flies at all, or have you ever?
I do.
Yeah. So first, you got Cutlass. This is the vice question. So, what vice do you use? What's your go-to vice?
Dynaking, baby.
Dynaking. Yeah.
And by the way, I was worried there for a while because you couldn't get a replacement pair of jaws if you had to, but Mayfly bought them, and they're starting to advertise again, and thank goodness, because I'm about to need some some replacement parts.
Yeah, I remember we had the CEO of the Mayfly. We talked about that was a big that's a nice acquisition and they're doing good stuff. I think those companies are doing great stuff with what they have going. But so you got that, and then the other question on the vice is your vice. Like, what is that thing you do, or maybe you've done, that you've had to give? And I got one right now. Let me just give mine because I haven't given my vice. So mine is coffee. I've always said this, that coffee, I love coffee so much. I love microbrews. There's a lot of stuff I love, but I always know that if you do anything in excessive, you're going to have to quit it. Your body's just going to be like, you know what? You need to stop doing that. So coffee's always been one of those things where I'm in and out, but so I'm off coffee now, and I'm feeling better. And so that's my advice.
Interesting.
But how about you?
I'd have to say heroin. I'm kidding.
Right. So in the past, when you were a kid, that was
you know what? It's probably I learned to make moonshine, and
oh wow,
you in Montana. I don't know if I should broadcast.
Yeah, this is amazing.
I make fuel. No,
right.
I make homemade fuel,
biofuel.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. You make moonshine, which is essentially just straight alcohol. What is moonshine? It's there are probably lots of ways to make it, but how do you make moonshine?
So it's fuel and it's alcohol, and mine are technically rums, because I start with the molasses and brown sugar, right? And it's a wash, not a mash, but it all kind of works and ferments, and then you distill it in a still, and it comes out, I don't know, mine comes out about 160 proof. And then you use that to mix into whatever, but yeah.
There you go. That's a good advice. So you've got some good bottles in your cabinet.
A few, I got these cool little oaken barrels.
Oh, right.
Jarred so I can even barrel age these things.
Wow. Cool. Awesome. Well, and the final one today is, and I love this one too, the music or podcast question, because I kind of just love hearing about music, getting something from Spotify or whatever. So what's your type of music? If you're going on a fishing trip, do you listen to more music or podcasts when you're on the road trip?
So my podcast percentage has been climbing. Right. But I guess music, I like Finnish rap.
Finnish wrap?
My mom was a Finn, and there's some really cool Finnish wrap.
Really? That's a serious thing. Are you Finnish wrap? And I have no idea.
Spotify. Go on Spotify, look Finnish wrap.
Oh, this is perfect.
The only way.
Good. All right, so we're going to put some Finnish wrap, and this is like Finnish from the country, the Finland, and then we'll put that in the show notes, and maybe even on Instagram if we can get a story or a reel, we'll put some music in there as well. So I'm excited about this one, Jim. So I'm glad we went on our random track today. Let's just take it away just with a few tips. Like, you've had all these people, and I know I'm not sure of your casting, ability and things like that, but if you had to say, somebody's listening now, 3 takeaways, 3 tips maybe on casting. What have you learned from all these people? You've been around some of these people. What do you tell somebody that's like, oh my God, I want to get better at casting? What do you tell them to do?
Number 1, less power and more smoothness. So there's 2, right? Don't use so much physical effort, smooth things out, and the stop is all important.
Yep, that's it. You got to stop. That's the transfer of energy. Awesome. All right, so we got 3 quick takeaways from you, and I think, like we said, we're going to keep this conversation going. We're going to be heading out to, we'll put in the show notes, ggacc.org, but also we have Chris, and remind me again, Chris's last name?
Corrich.
And he's still got the program going, right? I mean, Maxine, I think, is in college now, and she's maybe not doing as much, but he's got other people. He's still coaching.
He is very much in demand, both as a coach and as a teacher, a casting teacher. He's next level, man. Hey, Dave, can I just plug the book we're working on?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yep.
I we missed talk about that. So the reason I went on the board at the Golden Gate Club was to work on publishing the club's history, right? And so I inherited a manuscript of 130,000 words and about 1,000 historical photographs, and we've been assembling that, and we've just shipped our proposal off to 6 publishers, and 4 of them have come back very interested to kind of get to the next level. So hopefully we're going to get this thing published and out. We want to document this. It could become, I don't know, an artifact in the industry, because there's just so much.
So everything we talked about, basically everything and more, you're going to basically detail all this history we talked about.
We're going to try and capture as much of that in a really aesthetically beautiful kind of coffee table style book. And it's probably a couple of years out, but when we come out, I think this could be something of interest way beyond just the members of the club. Oh,
definitely. No, I mean, just like we said, we could have sat with Jim Green on his stories probably the whole time. I'm glad we got some of those on, because that's part of why I love doing this, is that, we got our own documentation here with the podcast that's going to live out there for a long time. So, so this has been cool. Thanks, Jim. Well, I appreciate, everything you're doing out there, and definitely looking forward to keeping in touch. And hopefully, I'd love to get up and attend one of these events. I know Spay-O-Rama is right around the corner. Travis Johnson, we've talked to some of these people on the podcast, so I think we're going to keep digging into the spay. That's a big thing. But I appreciate all your time today and sharing all the stories.
If you're ever near $3 Bridge, be sure and give me a call. You should pop over and we can sip a little moonshine and watch the river.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Jim.
You bet.
There we go. I'm running out the door. I've got my iPhone in the pocket, and just want to say thanks to Jim for that. I always love the history. I hope you enjoyed that one. And we're definitely going to be working on getting Jim back on the podcast, or somebody affiliated with the Casting Club. And I think we're going to leave it there today. You can check in with me anytime, Dave at wetflyswing.com, if you have any questions or want us to put together a podcast for you. That's the easiest way. You can also check with us on trips, see where we're heading next, see if we're heading to California for anything coming up. And I hope you have a great afternoon. I hope you have a great evening or great morning, wherever you are in the world. And I really appreciate you for spending some time with us today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.